My name's Joan Henry and I'm at Henry's Road, Loch. My husband and I, Gordon, have been here for 46 years. We started off with a dairy farm and potato growing and peas. And over the years, we worked very hard. We had this beautiful farm with a lot of bush, which my husband really enjoyed and I did, and the children. But one day, back in the 70s, we had a very bad car accident and Gordon was unable to actually work as a farmer anymore. So one day while Gordon was in hospital, Marty bought him a book written by Alistair Knox of Living in the Environment. And Gordon read that book and he said to me, we're making an enormous amount of mistakes with our farm. And he read that book 3 or 4 times and was, of course, about mud brick making. And he said he could barely walk, Gordon, when he got out of hospital. And he said, I think we could build a mud brick house. And I thought that was a pretty good idea because I thought if I make the bricks, I'll get a big house. So I paddled nearly 5,000 bricks with gumboots on, and each day I'd make a few. And I really did enjoy it. We finally got our lovely mud brick house built, and then the thought entered our head, how are we going to make a living? So friends said, why don't you go in for dinner, bed and breakfast? So that was a good idea, and we did extensions, and we had a lot of help from the family. Everybody in the second half started helping make mud bricks, and Gordon cut all the timber for our home, and that was really good. We got that going, and the family all helped with the dinner, bed and breakfast, and we met lovely people. We met different people that we would have ever met by, people different to whom the normal people we met with. And then we started on the conservation. Gordon fenced in where the bush was. We had about 50 acres of bush all around the farm. So that was to stop the cattle getting into the bush and ruining it because, the old way of farming was to let the cattle into the bush. Well, Gordon was well before his time and most people thought he was quite mad. And particularly when we built a mud brick house, I think people said, well, why don't you build a decent house? And by the time we got to the second stage, I had friends coming and saying, if I help you for the day, will you show me how to make mud bricks? Which was very good. And then, of course, we decided we wanted to put a fox-proof fence because we've got a lovely lot of animals in this place. Goannas, wallabies, kangaroos, wombats, echidnas, powerful owl, eagles. They all nest here and live here, and we thought, well, if we could stop the foxes and cats getting in. And so we finally got the money together to put a big electric fence around the bush. By this stage, we were on to our second house. We were 15 years over at Torwood doing our dinner, bed and breakfast. And then we started on our next house so that we could really do the conservation. We had lots of people come here. We've had lots of groups of students, people who've been needing work. Lots of groups we were able to get and make use of. And we built a bird observatory down. We had a great big dam which we used to use for irrigation. Well, that was a lovely setting for our bird observatory where people could come, and we've entertained a lot of people there with land care. We trust for nature because we've covenanted all our bush. So that we hope for the future that it can be protected and all this work won't be for nothing, and to protect all the animals too. I do have to sell it now because my husband has passed away, and I've been here now on my own for 18 months and I'm finding that the work is too much, but with the help of the family I have kept going. But I just hope the people who buy this lovely place enjoy it. And we've enjoyed it. It's been a delightful way of living. And I just hope it all keeps going forever.
My name's Martin Henry. I'm Joan and Gordon's son. and I had a lot to do with the formative areas of building up this sanctuary, getting it started and actually producing it. In spite of government departments who didn't want us to do anything, and various other people who thought we were insane, we went ahead with it anyway. This area of bush was the last. It had certain areas in it that had never ever been cleared. This was about the last piece of bush in the Bass River Valley that had never been actually touched. Well, we were responsible for part of it, which a responsibility that we took not lightly at all. There's graves in this bush, and there's Aboriginal trees that have been used, which we all thought were absolutely vital to keep safe, as well as the animals. And that was part of our responsibility as well. It was fascinating watching Gordon, who could barely walk, wandering down these beautiful big gullies with a chainsaw in his hand, trying to cut wood, or not trying to cut wood, but doing it incredibly skillfully with his friend Ian Mookage. I used to traverse these gullies for weeks at a time, doing the weeds and things like that. And it's a healing process. The bush is so beautiful and so natural. You feel like you're a different person when you're in there. And if you're clever and you're quiet, you can see the snakes hunting and the animals going up the trees. And it's just absolutely beautiful. A beautiful place to live and to never stop growing. It's very sad that the family has to, we have to relinquish this, but it just happens to be a financial necessity, and life moves on. And hopefully the person who takes it over will have much the same ideas that we have. And most people don't realise that the amount of work that was put into this place, and it's ongoing. It's just an enormous job. But it's still a job of love, really. I mean, because it never really made any money, but it was just such a beautiful place to live. One of the reasons why it started, because I gave Gordon a book, and I can never ever remember why I bought it or gave it to him, because it was totally left field for how Gordon was thinking at the time. But nevertheless, I did it. I thought maybe it was divine intervention, who knows. But anyway, it changed a lot of people's lives, more so than the family. It's a heck of a lot of other people came here and got an enormous amount of satisfaction, did enormous amounts of research in this small piece of bush. In some instances, it was highly regarded because they realised that since it was the last piece of bush in this area that really hadn't been totally rearranged by humans, it's where you figured out what was actually living here. They had no idea what plants were actually living here because it's all gone. So they were using this as a seed bank if anyone ever wanted to revegetate other areas. The amount of importance in here, what lives here, they still don't know exactly if the leadbeater is living here still or not, because it was originally discovered in the Bass River Valley, that's where we are now. And it goes on. I mean, the powerful owl has its nest here. This is where its centre of its territory lies, so it's absolutely vital that it's kept saved and it kept for future generations. I can't emphasise how important this area is for this whole area of Victoria, but unfortunately we're losing it at such a fast rate. This is becoming increasingly important. And I hope the next person goes in with the same ideals that we went into it with.
My name is Sally Henry. I'm Joan and Gordon's third child, and I suppose my connection with this place goes back really from the time when Gordon had his accident, and I was still living at home at that stage. I was still at high school. So I've lived with my mum and dad during those really difficult years when Gordon was incredibly sick, and then I finished year 12 and moved on, and then it was during that time after I moved out that Joan and Gordon began to formulate the ideas for building Torwood Lodge. And I remember the neighbours' absolute shock and horror at what they were trying to do, and the fear that the walls would just wash away. And I remember the great comment someone made once about having a slate for, weren't they going to cover it with a white shag pole carpet because it would look much better. And people just had no idea of what Joan and Gordon were trying to do in the 70s at that time. But what happened with Torwood Lodge and the building of that mud brick house was that it just brought Gordon and Joan alive. It just gave them an incredible focus and an incredible goal, and it actually really brought the family together as well. I remember the amount of work that went into it. I remember Joan making those mud bricks, 5,000 with her foot, and the tractor work that went into it, and the carving of the cutting up of the logs from the bush that had to be felled and had to be brought out. A lot of that time Gordon was actually down in the bush on his crutches and milling timber and working through, incredible weather just to build that house. And it became this absolute, almost like an absolute shrine to them. And it was a beautiful, beautiful place. Once it was built, just it began to attract so much attention. And then, of course, the ideas began to progress. Then they began to look at the bush. And again, the hard work didn't stop, because once they decided to create the bush and the sanctuary within it, and once you began to take people through that area, there had to be tracks made, the fence had to be built, there had to be clearing of certain areas, and then they began to, decide to build, fences, along the tracks, and it just went on and on and on. But it kept them going, and Gordon would work from, morning till night, even though he was still sick, and they were running the lodge and looking after the guests. It was a time when you'd come home and there was always something happening, and it was, full of life with people everywhere all the time. And then they decided to sell Torwood Lodge and build this place. And again, the work continued. But again, it's always been a real family affair. And I think Martin and myself have had our children, and our children have been brought up around this area. And the mud brick machine was run by my partner and Marty. And then my partner came into it around the early 90s. We moved back to this area, and he began working with Gordon and Ian Wilkage, who was Gordon's friend, in the bush, and helping them maintain the bush and keeping it clear of weeds and maintaining the track. So the work continued, and the sanctuary became, again, almost a lifesaver for Gordon, for Ian. George, that was working in it, just learnt so much from those two men. And so the legacy has been that for the Henry family, the last 30 years has been an amazing journey. And it is sad to see it go, but like all journeys, they come to an end and another journey starts. And so that's where we're all at. It's been an incredible experience, and hopefully that legacy with the bush will live on for many more years to come.
Hi, my name's Rochelle Virtue Henry, and I come into the scene around 1986. I moved up here with Martin to start our family, and was fortunate enough to be welcomed into the Henry family at the time when they were creating Torwood Lodge. After a lot of activity, as Sally's spoken, the bed and breakfast was up and running, and I had an extreme love of the bush and the animals that belonged in the bush. I heard a story from Gordon that many years ago a lot of the koalas in this bush were actually killed, and so it was a koala-less forest, and I felt very moved by that story and vowed that I would change that and bring the koala back to the forest. In my time in Melbourne, I'd met Dr. Chris Andrews, and he'd allowed me to help him feed his orphan and injured wildlife, and he'd introduced me to a lady called Claire Davis, who lives up here and had a wildlife refuge. And I hooked up with Claire, and she trained me to be a wildlife carer. I eventually set up a licensed wildlife refuge, and Claire, myself and Yvonne Adams, who's passed away, we set up the first registered wildlife care network in Gippsland called the South Gippsland Native Animal Rescue. Eventually we did raise some small koalas to adulthood, and they couldn't be released from the sites that they were rescued for danger reasons and risk reasons. And so eventually we did release a small mob into this bush, and they are koalas here today, and they have remained here. So the koala has come back to Henry's Creek Sanctuary. My passion for the animals continued, and Gordon and the Henrys fed that, and together we achieved getting some philanthropic trust fund to build a 22-strand fox-proof and cat-proof fence designed by an environmentalist called Bob Pease, who also has passed on. That fence is made at different degrees to stop different feral animals being able to gain access to the sanctuary, and it has a little safety measure on the bottom of the fence so that echidnas can't actually become trapped in the fence. We also went on to gain some funds to build the native animal rescue release cages, which are here on the property, and the bird hide that Joan and Gordon talked about with disability access. The animals that we've released into the sanctuary, well, we have limited it because with the fence it's now really an island, but we have introduced or released back wombats, kangaroos, possums, sugar gliders, ringtail possums, the koalas, the otter echidna. The animals that we haven't released but are here that are really significant, as Martin spoke about, are possibly the leadbeater's possum. We have had recorded sightings of the yellow-bellied glider, which is another significant endangered animal. The other work that we've done as a family that probably I am the instigator and facilitator of is setting up the Loch land care group, and the land care group was different to other land care groups in that it was small land holders, and we took a aerial view of all of our properties that run off Henry's Road, which we wanted to plant corridors to link up to the corridors that exist here, and 5 years later another photograph has been taken, and all of those landholders have actually created the corridors. So we've got a linkage for animals, especially the arboreal ones that can actually move freely to and from the sanctuary. The Loch land care group have played an important part in reforesting certain areas of the sanctuary, planting roadside vegetation, which now has a listing as Henry's Road now has a listing of significant roadside vegetation, so it can't be removed. They've supported Joan and Gordon, especially in their later years, not through land care but through becoming friends and putting in when certain work needs to be done. As Sally said, it's been a Henry enterprise, and I've been glad to have boarded the Henry Creek enterprise, and it's certainly been life-changing for me and a wonderful life for Martin and my children to grow up in, with such a beautiful environment and fantastic grandparents and family. That's it.